Have you ever wondered about the creepy aspects of the Otherworld in Coraline and what it contains? What about the fact that when Coraline goes through the door for the first time, the Beldam isn't there? And are you curious about the way time works in the Otherworld and if the Beldam can or cannot control it? Well, if you're watching this video, I bet you are. Hey everyone, it's CTO of the Theory channel, and Coraline is a film that I have looked deeper into than anything else. Ever. I recently watched Kubo and the Two Strings, another Leica masterpiece, but it still won't come near to the attention I give this girl and her spider-like other mother. And I'm not just copying what other YouTubers are doing right now, this truly was the movie that both haunted and enriched my childhood. And it's also the film that inspired me to join YouTube in the first place and put my thoughts out there. So if you haven't seen my first two theories on Coraline, I do recommend you to, but if you're in a bit of a time crunch, I will recap them for you right now. In part 1, I basically summed up and analyzed the theorizer's grand dame theory, while adding more pieces of my own. I also answered a bunch of questions at the end of it that were asking about things like the key, the well, and the Beldam's real eyes. Then, a couple months later, I made part 2, which was pretty much one really large theory about how the boring blue boy could be the Beldam's son. And now, in May, I have gathered many more thoughts from watching the film over and over again, looking at some commenter theories and analyzing theories made by other YouTubers, like the theorizer's recent parts 7 and 8. But without further ado, I give you Coraline, part 3. When skimming the movie a little bit, I noticed something rather surprising for the first time. That when Coraline goes through the door for the third time, her other mother is not there waiting for her, like the previous 2 times. Awaiting Coraline instead is a bounty of food and some new clothes. And of course, that in itself is very obvious, but just think about it. She isn't there. Why would the Beldam not be waiting for Coraline? We have to remember that at this point in the film, the Beldam is still trying to win over Coraline's love, and although showering her with lunch and an outfit is very enticing, it's not nearly as bond-creating as the Beldam actually being there for Coraline. And since the Beldam captures kids around 40 years apart, a date like this only comes around for her about 1 in 14,600 times. Way to blow it. But we know how cunning and strategic the Beldam is, so there had to be such a good reason that it made up for not being with Coraline. So what could that reason be? Well, as we know, Coraline's parents were taken sometime during Coraline's 3rd visit to the Otherworld, and there doesn't seem to be a bigger reason for her absence than stealing her mother and father. This brings up an even deeper question though. Can the Beldam predict the future? And I still don't think so, as I addressed this question in part 1. I feel that if she was, she would never have let Coraline get away from her, as she would have known that Coraline was going to cheat, throw the cat, and escape. But if she can't predict the future, then why did she kidnap the parents if she didn't know that Coraline wasn't going to be seduced by her world? Because she hadn't even shown Coraline the buttons yet when all of this happened. And a logical explanation to all of this would be that the Beldam took the parents for basically insurance. Just in case Coraline did manage to escape, the Beldam would have the parents as leverage and be able to get Coraline back into the other world. And maybe she did this with all of the ghost children as well, just for insurance reasons. But I don't think that's correct. We know that the Beldam eventually gets low on energy and power, and that she only takes a child's soul when she is desperate. Also, creating all of the wonders for Coraline like the garden, the theater, and the mouse circus drains energy. So unless she absolutely had to, I don't think that she would steal the parents, as that would most likely take a ton of energy. And alluding to her spider-like qualities again, spiders generally focus on what's happening in the moment and how they're going to catch their prey right then and now, not thinking ahead to a what-if scenario. But all of this isn't the actual theory, because again, I don't believe that the Beldam took the parents for insurance purposes. The real theory is about time, and not of the herb kind, but of the ticking clock kind. I have long wondered 2 questions, and these are the 2 that I'll be discussing for most of the video. How does time work in the Otherworld, and can the Beldam control time? When Coraline goes through the door for the third time, we can assume that it is about 1 o'clock since it's lunchtime. In the real world, the weather is foggy and the sky is gray. Then, Coraline has lunch by herself in the Otherworld, sees Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's show, and apparently goes to bed much before dinner. So if we assume that Coraline slept for about 10 hours, then she would have woken up in the early hours of the morning, around 3. She talks to the other father, goes outside with the cat, confronts the Beldam, meets the ghost children, and finally escapes, all of which took at most 2 or 3 hours. But when she's finally home in the real world, it's not 6 in the morning, as it's light out and Wybie comes over to ask for the doll back. And it would make perfect sense that time doesn't move in the Otherworld, and that Coraline comes back at the same time she went in, if it weren't for the flies around the groceries that her mother left on the table. Plus, when Coraline goes through the door for the last time, it's in the dead of night, and she comes back in the afternoon, so time has to move somehow. So I have come up with the horrifying conclusion that the Beldam can manipulate time. And that is very bad news for Coraline's future, as we believe that the Beldam got the key and still lives. I think that the Beldam is able to control where the portal leads to, or rather, time-wise. So she controlled the time pocket that Coraline was going to end up in the first time that she escaped. And because of the flies around the groceries, we can say that it's at least 1 day after she left the real world, but just remember, the two worlds aren't parallel time-wise. So the Beldam must have purposely put Coraline in that alternate timeline, which is 1 or 2 days after Coraline left. But why? Well, she obviously needed to put Coraline in a timeline with her parents missing, but that could have been done any time after the Beldam took the parents, which we're assuming was when Coraline was having lunch and seeing the show. And I see that this is getting very complicated, but that's okay, because complexity is my middle name. Yeah, right. Anyway, the Beldam put Coraline in this timeline because she wanted Coraline to realize that her parents were missing the quickest way possible. Notice how just a few minutes after Coraline gets home, Wybie rings the doorbell and wants the doll back, which is gone. And why is it gone? Because the other mother had taken it. This should start to raise suspicion in Coraline's mind. And then, of course, the cat takes her to see the mirror, which is magically controlled by the Beldam, and she realizes what's actually happening, and why her parents are missing. And why does the Beldam want to be so efficient in getting Coraline back to the other world? Because she is running extremely low on energy and power, so she is desperate for a soul to feed on, as quickly as possible, which is just confirmed by the final struggle between her and Coraline. So I hope that clears it up a bit, but you might be asking, then why doesn't the Beldam place Coraline back in the past, in a timeline when her parents were still missing when she escapes for the last time? It's because the Beldam is so weak at this stage, almost dead, that she doesn't have the power to keep up her world, let alone move it along a dimension timeline. But if she did have that energy, then it probably would have been bad news for Coraline. But I guess it still is, since we think that the Beldam is still alive. So I think I've solved all of the time-related issues. The only question we have left is, why is the Beldam not there when Coraline comes into the Otherworld for the third time? I had wrapped my mind around this point for hours, because none of the options we have made sense. If the Beldam can't predict the future, then how would she know that Coraline was going to escape? So my final conclusion for this is that it had nothing to do with the parents, or time, or Coraline's escape chances. Or does it? I'm really not sure about this. Maybe the Beldam did just take the parents for insurance reasons. Or maybe she was doing something completely different and unknown during this time. Whatever it is, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I'm already planning part 4, and it should be included somewhere in there. Now I will just recap everything I've covered today. The Otherworld has the ability to move between time dimensions, which means that it's all under the Beldam's control. When Coraline escaped the Otherworld for the first time, the portal took her forward about 1 or 2 days of real-world time, so that Coraline would be drawn back to the Otherworld the quickest way possible. The Beldam doesn't do this when Coraline escapes for the final time, because she is almost dead and low on energy, so she doesn't have the power to control the time dimensions. I still have not solved the mystery of the missing other mother, but hope to soon. And as you can see from the length and depth of all of my Coraline videos, I go the most into it, which I love. Most of this was just a flood of ideas about time and the properties of the Otherworld, but I still hope you enjoyed. So, see you guys.